All right, guys, we're back. Let's go ahead and dive into hiding some of our edits with transitions and with adjustment layers, creating our own transitions. So in this case, what I've got is we've gone ahead and finished out adding our B-roll. You can see it's very similar to what we started in the previous video, but you've gone through hopefully at this point and added in all of your other B-rolls. So we've got all those in place. But now we want to go through and I want to start adding some visual interest. So for example, here at the very beginning, use my up arrow to get back to the beginning and hit play.
Look, if you're a struggling nursing student, you should be studying less and living more.
All right, so in this case, you can tell that I've actually, in order to not have it just be a talking head this whole time,
You should be
what I want to do is actually zoom in on her just a little bit to actually make it have a little bit of a change so it keeps the viewer interested in watching. And having something happen about every 2 seconds is a good way to keep people's attention here in social media video land. But in this case, you can see the jump from here to here.
You should be studying less and living.
Is that it pushes in a little bit to our subject. So in this case, the way I did that is I simply selected the clip. I'm going to go and open up my effects tab. So Shift 5 will open up your effects tab. If you're in any of the other windows, Shift 5 under the window effect controls rather. So the effect controls is going to bring this up here. And you can see when I click on the next clip, it's actually that one has been scaled up to 115% and moved around just a little bit. Now, if you've moved things and you don't like the way it is, you can reset them with this little reset parameter box here, and that will actually bring it back down to where it's in the same place. But let's go ahead and I'm going to take this one. Let's just select the scale, and I'm going to scale this up just a little bit. That 115% was really good. And the thing is, I'm wanting to push this in just a little so that as it jumps, it kind of gives us just a little bit of drawing us in a little closer to her. Let me go ahead and set that to 100 and let's say 112%. But I also want to make sure that my the eyeballs are ideally in the same place, because if we go from one to the next and her eyeballs are in a very different place, it tends to look a little more jumpy than what we might want. So I'm going to just put this right here, and I'm just right here at this clip edge, and I'm going back and forth just to make sure that those eyes stay in the same place. And they're zooming in, and I think that's going to be good. Now, in this case, I'm wanting this whole line. You should be studying less and living more. So draw in the viewer, get them a little bit closer. But right now,
Student, you should be studying less and living more.
I don't want it to drop back there. I don't want it to go from zoomed in and then cut back for the second half of the line. So I could either try to memorize all these and then put them right over here and replace them, or I can actually just select this clip. I'm going to copy it, Command C, come over to this clip, select it, and I want to paste the attributes. So Edit, Paste Attributes, or Option Command V. Option Command V is going to bring up my paste attributes, and you can see that these attributes, position and scale, are in the Motion tab right here. So if I say I want to copy and paste the motion attributes, then it's going to paste those motion attributes, the new position, scale, or any others if I had changed them, over onto this new clip. And as soon as I paste those over, and you can see it says scale attribute times. In other words, if one clip is longer or shorter, just go ahead and make that position and scale longer or shorter so it scales to however long this clip is. So I'm gonna hit OK. Boom, you see that now both of those clips.
Student, you should be studying less and living more.
Beautiful. Now, I would like to hide this just a little bit. It is not wrong to leave it here as a cut,
You should
but let's see if we can hide it. Now, there's a couple ways we could. In this case, we've got a hard cut, but let's go open our effects. Shift 7 under the window menu, Shift 7 will open up your effects. And you can see I've already looked for the morph cut in here. Now, there's a couple options. Let me show you those two options. If I simply look for a dissolve, underneath the video effects transitions, you can find block dissolve, cross dissolve. The cross dissolve has a little blue square around it because it is the default transition. If I wanted a different one to be the default, I can actually just right click on it and choose set selected as default transition. But this dip to black is going to give us a very different look. It'll actually
student, you should be
dip down to black and come back up. Very appropriate for certain types of video, not necessarily for this one. Let's try the cross dissolve. I'll drag that over, and then you'll see
nursing student, you should be
it's really long.
Student, you should
looks a little weird as everything kind of slowly zooms in. Probably would look a little better if we simply hovered over the side of our transition and trimmed it a little bit smaller. Let's see how that looks.
Student, you should be
so it doesn't look bad. It's definitely a visible transition.
You should be studying.
Okay, but I'm going to take this and let's try one more. I'm going to look for the morph cut, and that's actually right here under the video transitions dissolve. So I'll drag this morph cut on here, You notice when I do, it's actually analyzed it in the background, so we have to leave that alone for a second. If I select it, you can see that it's going to show the sources. It's going to switch from one to the other. If I need to force it to analyze, I can click analyze and it'll analyze it again. But in this case, that should actually be good. Now, the red line over the top indicates that it's too much processing for this to actually be able to play back in real time. But moreover, you're going to notice the point of a morph cut is it tries to artificially create in between frames. And you notice the longer the morph cut, if the video is changing, you get these really weird artifacts. Her face starts to melt. Not what we want. But just so you can see what that would look like.
Student, you should
Not ideal, right? So we can get a full quality look at it if we simply select this and we want to render it. So under the sequence menu, we can see a render the effects in to out. And this is the only one that has a red bar of everything on here right now. So this is the only one that really needs rendered. But if I hit the return key, it actually goes through and it renders it, replaces this with a separate little video clip that it's saved inside the project folder. And now we can see what it'll look like.
student, you should be studying
Definitely too long. Now, the trick with a morph cut is that you have to make them almost as small as possible. And the before and after actually have to be pretty close. But if they are, I'm going to make this really short, hit return so I get a full render. And then let's go and see. Oh, one more quick render. And let's go see how that looks now. Let's see if it hides it. And so it just looks like a nice quick push in. Ready?
student, you should be
Ooh, that looked pretty good. See it?
student, you should be
So in that case, you don't even see any artifacts. There's just a little push in. Beautiful. It's almost like the camera just pushed in quickly. But again, if we've made that too much longer, you probably would see some weird artifacting happen on the screen.
you should be
So I love that morph cut. In this case, let's see if there's even a visible cut here.
and living more.
And there's not.
The problem is
So we could try a morph cut back
more. The problem
to get back to this smaller one. Although I'm seeing that her eyes definitely change location. So I'm going to take this one and we could either copy and Option Command V to put those motion attributes. So she's in the same place here.
more. The problem
But you notice that there's definitely an edit there because the mouth jumps. So let's try morph cut again. Let's see if we can do it. I'm going to drag and drop this morph cut on there. I want it to be as short as humanly possible. I'm going to hit the enter key or the return key rather to render. And let's see how this all looks together now.
you should be studying less and living more. The problem
Oh, not quite done analyzing. A lot of times I find if I just stick my playhead right over it, give it a second to analyze, then as soon as it's done, a quick render, and let's see how that looks now. I can actually just get over to it and use my arrows to move through it first. It might work. You can see a little bit of weirdness here in the mouth, but if it's going by really fast, let's see.
less and living more. The problem is more. The problem is
That's probably not too bad. Otherwise, if you don't like it, I'm going to delete that one. And I'm actually just going to take this clip and let's reset the position and the scale. So, and let's see how that looks now.
you should be studying less and living more. The problem is
So it looks a little awkward. We could try a simple cross dissolve and put it back here. Make that one nice and short. Cross dissolve probably is going to be just a quick little push back.
living more. The problem is
So not bad. And I actually kind of like just the cross dissolve because it's quick and it flies by and it adds a little movement.
more. The problem is you don't understand
Cool. All right. So that gives us our ability to hide transitions sometimes or jump cuts with that morph cut. Sometimes we can use the cross dissolve, which is just kind of a classic transition. And while it may look more visible, it also, if it's short enough and moving by quickly,
more.
it works just fine. Now you'll notice we also, of course, you can go through and explore all the different video transitions over here. Just toggle open your video transitions, make sure you're not searching for anything, and you see you've got all kinds of irises and boxes. These tend to be a little cheesy for me. I don't really use those all that much, but if I were to put one in, you see that we've got
less and living less and living
well, you're not even seeing it because they're too similar on both sides. Anyway, so you can try playing with all these other cuts and see if you like them. Now, we can also make our own transitions. So in this case, you can see I've got this lens flare here that hides this transition from her talking into our first B-roll clip. Now, let's double click on this. And when I open it up, you see it looks like nothing. It's just an empty clip. If I go to the effect controls, which is also Shift 5, I see that I have another video effect on here called lens flare. So I've added this. So let's walk through this process of creating one of these on your own. I'm going to move that out of the way. First, we need to create what is called a adjustment layer. So an adjustment layer, I can come down to that new item, click on new item, and go to a new adjustment layer. And this new adjustment layer will default to the same size as my active sequence. So I'm going to hit OK. That's going to create this adjustment layer. You can see I've made a few others. I'm just going to rename mine Flare Transition, just so we can find it very easily. And then if I were to take it and just pull it out, you can see it just makes it the default length of imported files. So I could either do that, or if I just have a specific place I want it, like right to start right here and to end right here, then of course I can throw my adjustment layer up here into the timeline, and I can use my source record editing to drop it into place. So I'm going to select my video layer 1 so that it takes this, but it fits it just right into this spot with my overwrite edit. That's the period key. And it says, well, do you want to ignore the sequence in and out point? I'm going to say ignore the source. I don't care where, it's just a long empty clip. So ignore whatever in points and out points are here. I'm going to keep the sequence in and out point. And I'm going to hit OK, boom. Now you see there's nothing visible on it. An adjustment layer you can think of almost like a plain piece of glass that's set over the top of your sequence, and you can add stuff to it. So you can add color correction, we can add effects. So let's come back over here to our effects, and I'm going to look for a lens flare. So if I look for lens, I can see lens flare under video effects, generate lens flare. Great. So I'm going to take that lens flare and let's just go ahead. We can either drag and drop it onto this, or since I've got the flare transition already loaded in the source window, I could either drag it up there. I could even come up to the effects controls and just drag and drop it there. You'll see either way we do that, whether I click on it, I drag it over here onto flare transition, it all ends up in the same place. So with this lens flare, we've got our flare, but it just right now is just sitting where it's supposed to be on the screen. So it's not really doing anything interesting. It's just there on the screen. So let's do this. I'm going to go ahead and I want to automate this using keyframes so that it moves from one corner of the screen up here down to the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead, let's grab this lens flare, and I'm going to go to the flare center and select that. And now that I've got it selected, you can see that I get this little crosshair in the middle of where this flare is. And I'm going to move it all the way up here to the corner. And now, because I want that flare center at the start of the clip to be in that corner, I have to turn on animation right here with this little stopwatch. It says toggle animation. So I'm going to click on that, and you notice now everything gets turned to blue, and this flare center has actually added this little keyframe, this little diamond right here. Now, if I move over to the end of the clip, so I can just drag this playhead over to the end, I want to make sure I'm on the very last frame. So this is after the last frame, so I need to go left arrow one time, so I'm in the last frame. And all I want to do is I'm going to come back and grab that flare center, and over the course of it, let's just go ahead, grab that flare center, grab this little guy, and I'm going to drag and drop, or drag him down here to where over the course of the clip now, you see that now that I've changed that, the flare starts here where this first keyframe was, and as the clip plays, because I had my playhead at the end of the clip, you can see that Premiere automatically adds all the movement necessary to go from this spot at the beginning of the clip to this spot at the end. Now, that's great. I could make it happen faster if I wanted it to go all the way to the bottom there, like by the end, or not even by the end, but by somewhere in the middle. You can see now it gets to the bottom way before I'm ever actually at the end. So I'm going to make sure that this is over at the end. If I wanted them to reverse, I actually could just take these 2 points, because this keyframe that was made, it just stores those values at wherever it's located. So if I actually moved this to the end and moved this one to the beginning, now the flare is actually going to start over there, and you see as we move through it goes the other way. So that's just a useful thing to know. You can actually easily reverse these things. I'm going to put those back where they were and put this one back at the beginning. Now it's still not hiding that transition, but it's kind of helpful, but there's still this big visual change in the middle. So what I want to do, I want to make it get, as it moves across this little pathway, when it gets to this point, it should be as bright as possible. It should flood the screen. And then it should go back to fading out to a regular little flare as it gets to the end. So go back to the beginning of the clip, and now let's go with our flare brightness. And so I'm going to need to automate that. I want it to start dim, get brighter, brighter, brighter until it's completely flooded the screen with light, and then as it goes away, it gets dimmer and dimmer. So flare brightness, let's animate that on. So I've got this flare brightness set to 100%. And now I'm going to move to the middle. And right around the time it gets to this point, let's take that brightness and just crank it up until this is blasted out. So we will not be able to see the video change underneath that flare. Yeah, that looks pretty good, pretty bright. Okay, and you see it's added another keyframe there because we had our stopwatch turned on. And now I want to get over to the exact place that this other keyframe ends. And I can either do that by dragging over it until the playhead is exactly where it's supposed to be, or you can actually even use these little arrows. These little arrows will go to next keyframe. So if I want to be precise, I can click go to next keyframe here. That puts my playhead exactly in the right place. And now let's make a new keyframe on brightness by setting that back down to 100%. And I can also just click in here and type 100. And now we have our flare that comes in right here. And as it goes towards that center keyframe, you can see the brightness getting a little bit brighter every time. It's super bright. And then as it's continuing on its path to move towards the lower right corner, the brightness goes back to 100%. So it starts at 100, goes up to 267, it looks like, and then moves back down. So let's see how that looks.
Problem is,
Yeah, it's pretty quick.
you don't.
Not bad. Now, in this case, if I want to see full quality again, I can hit the return key. That renders it, so I get full quality.
Look
And then I can come over and check it out.
more. The problem is, you don't understand.
So it's fast, it's kind of interesting, it catches the eye.
Problem is,
But that's just one way to do it. If we didn't want it to be quite that extreme, or if I wanted it to take a little longer, I could just stretch this adjustment layer out. But you notice now the keyframes do not start at the beginning and they don't start at the end. I feel like it was going a little too fast there. So I can simply grab both these keyframes and say, no, 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 start at this new beginning. Click and drag them over and grab these two and drag them over till they are at the beginning of the last frame. Let's see how that looks.
problem is, you don't understand.
Beautiful. All right, so with a quick render, we will have our flare transition. So that is a couple different ways we can utilize transitions in here. We can build our own transitions using adjustment layers. And then, of course, if we wanted to change these even more, we could add other sort of video effects or video transitions to them. And so using your creativity, that will be a perfect way to find just go through and continue to make some interesting things happen. Only thing I would encourage you to do is not just load up a bunch of these page peel transitions or random things that may or may not actually be useful. Like let's just throw one on so you can see it. They might just look a little awkward actually. So, but if we pop this on here and we look, you can see that looks very 90s, like very old school, not something I want. So if you don't like one, you can simply select on it and hit delete and you'll be back to a hard cut.
You don't know how to.
So that is the next section, creating our transitions, adding those, and creating at least one special transition using an adjustment layer. So go through the rest of this project, add your transitions. You want to make sure that
I know.
that they all look good. You can use hard cuts
That's exactly where I.
when it makes sense, or if you feel like there's just a little bit of a dissolve that would be helpful here, I'm going to go in, make sure that my cross dissolve is the default. So I'll right click on this and choose set selected as default transition. And now you can actually add transitions to this by applying the video transition with Command D. So if I simply select this and hit Command D, that will add that default transition. Now, if you're like me and you notice in a fast-paced video, this default transition
Exactly where I.
is happening pretty quickly.
Exactly where I.
So like I like that cross dissolve, but if I just used the default, it was this long.
That's exactly where I was.
So it doesn't really make sense to have her keep talking as the other face is fading on the screen. So if I want my default transitions to be shorter, then go to my Premiere Pro Preferences, or Command comma, and I'm going to come in here and in my timeline, I want my video transition default duration to be, and you can choose frames, seconds, etc. I'm just going to set it to half a second, 0.5 seconds. And same with the audio transition default duration, 0.5 seconds. And still images, 5 seconds if I pull them in. That seems like reasonable. I can always make them longer or shorter. So let's see, I think that's good. I'm actually also going to turn off this preference while we're in here, this play after rendering previews, because I don't like that it's returning all the way to the beginning. So I'm going to turn off those playback end, return to beginning, and play after rendering previews. That way, if I do put something on that needs, for example, a render, come in here and maybe tweak this just slightly, go to this one and maybe make it 234%. So it's going to require a whole render. Now I can just hit return, render it, and it doesn't jump back to the beginning and start playback. So great little handy preference.
Time. I know how.
Beautiful. Looks great. So go through, add your transitions, make it sound good, make it feel good and look good. Use a combination of morphs, dissolves, hard cuts between the A-roll and the B-roll shots, and make sure that transitions end together across multiple tracks. So for example, if I come over here and look at this one, with this,
Long ago. And today.
as it cuts out of this, it finishes this line,
Ago. And today.
it cuts back to her, and that's great. That's a perfect place for a hard cut. But if I was to come in and Command D, add a cross dissolve here, and then select and Command D, add a cross dissolve there, you notice they're not going to end at the same time. So it actually is going to look a little awkward because this one's going to start to fade out. And then the background comes in, but it's in the process of dissolving into this next one, which means that this clip is actually starting early. It's starting all the way back here. So you're seeing this weird transition of her mouth between two different clips. The end of this clip and an early part of this clip. So that looks a little weird. So we want to make sure we don't do that. If you have to apply a cross dissolve like this, I would just not apply them over places where it's already got another cross dissolve going. Or trim this out if you can, or trim these shorter, and then just trim this back until those transitions end at the same time. And that should typically look a little better. Let's see how that looks.
Long ago. And today.
See, it still looks a little funny. So I typically am going to avoid having cross dissolves like this happen over another cross dissolve, because then you have layers of multiple faces coming together. So not ideal. If you can avoid it, I definitely would. I'm going to select this and delete it. And probably just going to use hard cuts on the outs of this, unless it happens to land far enough in that you can just add a little cross dissolve. Let me trim this back until it ends it begins where the other clip is already in. Then you won't have any problems, because as this one starts to fade out, it's already on the new clip. So it just fades directly to her.
Long ago. And today.
And that looks fine. So if you do have spots where you feel like a dissolve is really appropriate, just make sure that it's only happening over a complete other clip. You do not want it happening after or over the top of another dissolve, or you start getting layers of dissolves and it looks weird. So just a couple things to keep in mind there. Go through and add your transitions and you'll be good to go. And hopefully understand a bit more about them. We'll come back and look at motion graphics and titles next.